The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
An unarmed man was shot in the head by Los Angeles police officers over the weekend after he appeared to be just flagging them down for help. A passerby recorded what is incredibly graphic video of the incident from a car, then posted it to Twitter. We're not going to play the video, and it's not because we don't think people should necessarily see it, but it is graphic to a degree where I just, even though we could kind of give a warning, I want people to go out and look for the video if they truly want to see it rather than us showing it. The video does show the man appearing to be unconscious, lying on his face with a gaping hole in his head, and police officers handcuffing his hands behind his back as his head bleeds profusely. The LAPD said that the man had a towel wrapped around his hand, and the two officers believed that there was a weapon concealed inside of that towel. And the man reportedly waved over the officers in their patrol car in the Los Feliz area of LA, which is northeast of Hollywood, around 6:30 p.m. that day. Officers got out of their vehicle. One ordered the man to, quote, drop the gun, according to what an LAPD lieutenant named John Janal told local TV. Janal said the man extended his arms towards the officers, did not respond to police, and thus was shot. Later, it was discovered that he was not carrying a weapon at all. Witnesses say they heard 3 or 4 shots ring out during this confrontation. The LAPD said as far as handcuffing him as he was laying on the ground bleeding with his brain exposed is just standard procedure for anyone considered a suspect. Lewis, I know you've been following the story. What was your thought?
My first thought was that you may think this is radical, maybe not you, maybe the listeners, that it's time to take away lethal weapons from police officers. Just hearing this every day, a story like this comes up, and I'm thinking to myself, there's no need for this to happen. Let's just provide non-lethal alternatives, and then we'll know that we have the bravest officers on the streets because they'll know that they won't have any guns.
Well, some countries do have sort of the regular police that you see around don't carry guns. And then they have teams where if there's a situation that specifically requires officers with guns, then that team is called, kind of like a SWAT team, except a much lower standard, which is instead of all police have guns and the SWAT team is basically the military, you have the SWAT team equivalent are the police that carry guns. The problem with that is that there are so many private guns owned in this country that it would be hard to argue that the police should not have guns. And we've talked about how the prevalence of gun ownership in this country is part of why police are so scared of individuals having guns. What is abundantly clear, aside from whether you agree with Lewis or not about police carrying guns, is that police need more training to recognize whether we are actually dealing with a critical situation or not. That seems to be clear.
I agree that more training can only be a good thing, but I'm not convinced that's the answer here. Perhaps there's no amount of training that would have stopped this from happening. Everyone's different. Everyone reacts differently to different situations. And I don't know if this can be trained. I don't know if you can just, work this out. Some people are going to overreact, and that's what happened here.
We're going to continue following this story and tell you what comes of it. We know, of course, of the shooting in the South Carolina church where Dylann Roof has admitted to going in and targeting black people because they were black. One of the background stories that have developed is that in Charleston, South Carolina, there is still a Confederate flag. Rather, in Columbia, South Carolina, there is still a Confederate flag flying on the grounds of the South Carolina State House. And as Cornell historian Edward Baptist explained in a series of tweets, the Confederate flag is not just a symbol of the pro-slavery rebellion in the context of the American Civil War. It is also a symbol of white supremacy, and there is now a movement developing to get any official state Confederate flags taken down. In Virginia, license plates have a Confederate flag on them, and there is a movement there to have the Confederate flag also removed from license plates. Some of Edward Baptist's tweets that I will read to you. South Carolina's Stars and Bars flag started as the battle flag of pro-slavery traitors who refused to accept an election's results. In the course of the Civil War, the flag became the symbol of not only slavery and treason, but the murder of black soldiers. In the 1950s, the battle flag was revived not just as a symbol of resistance to federally mandated desegregation, it was also a symbol of terror, of the violent intimidation of African Americans who dared assert their rights. The Stars and Bars promised lynching, police violence against protesters and others, and violence against churches. South Carolina's state flag is a flag of slavery, but it is also a flag of terrorism. That terror is, among other things, anti-religious and particularly anti-Christian. Ministers, worshipers, people singing hymns have been attacked time and time again by those who serve it and those who wave it. Numerous South Carolina politicians, including the governor, the Republican governor, Nikki Haley, have started the process for removing these Confederate flags. I could not agree more, Lewis. And for a long time, we've been talking about it. There's a group that insists there is nothing at all offensive about the Confederate flag. It is just a symbol of independence and patriotism and history. Actual empirical analysis of history tells us that that could not be further from the truth.
If you are one of the people who believes that, you are ignorant. There is no other. There's no other possibility. I watched Nikki Haley's statement about taking the flags down, and I'm glad she said it, although I don't think she meant it.
Well, when I saw it, I think Nikki Haley recognizes that at this point, and South Carolina is having plenty of business problems already, the Confederate flag is bad for business, and it's just bad as a PR thing. I don't know. I agree with you. I don't know that she means it for the reasons that we think the flag should be taken down. I think she recognizes as a PR move, for the business reasons, it just makes sense to take the flag down.
Yeah, I think you would agree with me that it's pretty embarrassing that we are living in a country where that flag is being proudly flown.
Oh, it's an absolute embarrassment. And the fact that there are people that are not only indifferent to that flag being flown, but actually support it as a proactive declaration of their politics and their views, it is truly embarrassing that we have people in this country that think it's something to be proud of the Confederate flag standing for everything that it stands for. It's so embarrassing. And we wonder why other countries view us the way they do.
Yeah, if you want something to show off that gives you a sense of Southern pride and the historical significance and perhaps your family who was involved in the Civil War, whatever, I guarantee you there is a better way to do it than flying the Confederate flag.
In completely not shocking and expected news, it turns out that admitted South Carolina church shooter Dylann Roof is also anti-Semitic. And we've talked for a long time about the bonds in history between Black and Jewish groups. We've talked about partnerships within the civil rights movement of the 1960s, where Jewish Americans were so involved with the fight for civil rights for African Americans. And I've been speaking for a long time about my disappointment with the Jewish-Black strife that's taking place in some parts of the country, including in parts of Brooklyn, New York. And we now have even more evidence that these are two groups that should be working together. And that's that South Carolina shooter Dylann Roof not only hated blacks, but also hated Jews. In addition to venting about his hatred of African Americans, his alleged manifesto singles Jews out as a minority group that poses a really big danger because Jewish people are able to blend in and, quote, look white, and are responsible for what he called, quote, the agitation of the black race. He said, quote, the problem is that Jews look white, and in many cases are white, yet they see themselves as minorities. Just like niggers, most Jews are always thinking about the fact that they are Jewish. If we could somehow turn every Jew blue for 24 hours, I think there would be a mass awakening because people would be able to see plainly what is going on. Abraham Foxman from the ADL, the ADL's national director, the Anti-Defamation League, said, quote, it is clear that Dylann Roof is an individual whose worldview is tainted not only by racism, but by hardcore anti-Semitism and deep-seated loathing of minorities. Anti-Semitism has long been a calling card of racists in America. Many of the white supremacists whom Roof seemed to revere are steeped in hatred of blacks, Jews, and other minorities. There is no surprise that a guy who hated black people for being black also hates Jews and harbors all sorts of anti-Semitic conspiratorial theories.
I think in the vast majority of cases, when you have someone like this, they usually hate everyone who isn't just a white Christian, right? I mean, that's, some more than others. but that seems to be the general thing.
Yeah, if it's hard to find one of these guys so steeped in so-called white pride and all of that stuff who would say, "Oh, I really have a problem with black people, but Jews and Hispanics I love." Right? I've never met a guy like that.
Yes, I think that is probably pretty rare. So yeah, of course, this is no surprise, and I'm sure we will continue to learn many more interesting things about this guy.
Yesterday, I told you about the connection between the Council of Conservative Citizens, a white supremacist group, and the admitted Charleston, South Carolina church shooter, Dylann Roof, and the fact that that group, the Council of Conservative Citizens, is not only a white supremacist group, but with regard to the politicians it's affiliated with, they are mostly Republicans. We now have stunning information about that group and its connection to 2016 Republican candidates. The leader of the Council of Conservative Citizens has donated tens of thousands of dollars to Republican campaigns, including those of 2016 candidates Ted Cruz, Rick Santorum, and Rand Paul, according to records that have now been released. Ted Cruz, a Texas senator, said Sunday night that he would be returning about $8,500 in donations that he received from the Texas donor named Earl Holt III, who lists himself as president of the Council of Conservative Citizens. A spokesman for the Cruz campaign said, quote, "We just learned this evening that Mr. Holt had contributed to the campaign. We will be immediately refunding all of those donations." Rand Paul's campaign said yesterday that it plans to send $2,250 they received from Earl Holt III to a victims fund set up in the wake of the shooting. Mr. Holt identified himself in some of the donation records as a Texas slumlord. He's given money to a bunch of current and former Republican members of Congress, including Senator Jeff Flake, Senator Rob Portman, former Representative Michelle Bachmann of Minnesota, Congressman Steve King of Iowa, and former Representative Todd Akin of Missouri. Not really any surprises there in terms of the candidates that seemed appealing to Mr. Holt III.
Yeah, interesting guy, it seems. And I'm glad that some of these candidates are acknowledging that this money has been donated and are doing some, I guess, kind of interesting things with it.
Yeah, I completely, we can't blame. The story here isn't that Ted Cruz and Rand Paul and Rick Santorum took money from this guy, because you can't possibly vet every donor. Candidates receive thousands of donations per week. You can't blame a candidate for legally accepting money from an American citizen. The story here is the systematic and pervasive connection between extremist hate groups made up mostly of white men and one of the two major political parties in the country. As I've said it many times before, obviously not all Republicans are racist, but American racists are overwhelmingly likely to find that their views are more represented in the Republican Party than the Democratic Party. That is proven to us time and again.
Yes, people are going to find that very offensive. And the people who do will say it's always the Democrats making things about race. Well, unfortunately, a lot of the time, it really is about race. And, there's nothing wrong with acknowledging that.
When the shooter says, "I shot black people because they are black, and I learned a bunch of this stuff from the Council of Conservative Citizens," it's about race. We have no reason to suspect that it's not. Send us tweets about this, twitter.com/David Pakman Show.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
This program depends on the support of our audience to stay on the air. We have something called the David Pakman Show membership program. Today's new member of the day is Samuel Masters. Samuel, not only a David Pakman Show member, but also made some very generous contributions to our current fundraising campaign, which I will update you about a little bit later in the show. To get samples of some of the membership benefits, including the commercial-free TV show and the bonus show, the world-famous bonus show, go to davidpakman.com/membership, where you can also sign up. Membership is only about 16 cents a day, and it does so much to support our program. And it's what 1 or 2 coffees a month will cost you. So really consider what this program is worth to you and think about becoming a member. You know, there's a bunch of sort of side stories with regard to the South Carolina church shooting that took place last week. And one of them is that we've talked generally about the difference in media coverage of the reaction to terrorism, depending on the type of incident and in particular the characteristics of the perpetrator. Was it a Muslim perpetrator or not? Was it a right-wing perpetrator or not? This has a huge impact on whether corporate media is willing to label it an act of terror. We now have a specific instance where we can expose the hypocrisy of one particular politician on this issue. That politician happens to be our old friend, Senator Lindsey Graham, who is a Republican also running for president right now. Let me take you back to 2013, when Senator Lindsey Graham responded to the Boston Marathon bombing, demanding that the government do everything it can to learn from the attack and prevent future attacks. Lindsey Graham in 2013, quote, "This man, in my view, should be designated as a potential enemy combatant, and we should be allowed to question him for intelligence gathering purposes to find out about future attacks and terrorist organizations that may exist that he has knowledge of, and that evidence cannot be used against him in trial. That evidence is used to protect us as a nation." Back then, a bunch of people did not agree with Lindsey Graham's claim that Zahar Tsarnaev, who is a U.S. citizen, could be designated as an enemy combatant, but Lindsey Graham insisted that attack was part of a more systemic problem based on Tsarnaev's Muslim faith. Remember that Tsarnaev killed 3 people and injured over 250. So what did Lindsey Graham say after the attack last Wednesday on a black church in his home state of South Carolina? Well, it was very different than what he said after Zahar Tsarnaev perpetrated the Boston Marathon bombing. Lindsey Graham said, "This attack in South Carolina is not evidence of any larger problem whatsoever." He was asked about the incident. He said his niece, who knew Dylann Roof, did not recall the shooter Roof making any statements related to race, adding, quote, "I just think he was one of these whacked out kids. I don't think there's anything broader than that. It's about a young man who is obviously twisted." This young man did murder 9 people compared to just 3 killed by Tsarnaev, but there's actual evidence that Dylann Roof was connected to and influenced by a number of broader movements, including the white supremacist movement, including the so-called patriot movement, all movements that the Southern Poverty Law Center, which tracks these groups, Lewis, says are a problem. So this is a problem for Lindsey Graham and his Republican Party, right? White supremacy is a right-wing movement. Non-whites taking over the country, something Dylann Roof stated was one of his concerns in his manifesto, is a regular refrain from many conservative groups. So Lindsey Graham, exposed as the hypocrite he is, eager to tackle so-called Islamic extremism, not really focused on terrorism motivated by white supremacy, even in his home state of South Carolina.
Yeah, continuing the idea that the brown guy is the bad guy, right? So, I know him wanting to distance what Roof was exposed to from the Republican Party. Of course, he wants to do that, but hypocrisy, and it's really harmful, this type of commentary.
When one of them does it, it's their nature. When one of ours does it, it's just a freak. It's not connected to anything at all. A major new scientific study has concluded that the gas extraction technique known as fracking poses a significant risk to human health and British wildlife, and fracking across the entire European Union should stop until significant regulatory reform happens. This report was done by ChemTrust, which is the British charity that looks at the harm that chemicals can cause to humans and wildlife, and it points out that the current regulatory structure around fracking in the United Kingdom is not sufficient, and that this is only going to get worse as the UK makes more budget cuts. And the report warns of risks to human health if the new Conservative government tries to fast-track fracking, which they're thinking of doing. And the thing for me, Lewis, is not only do we have the health-related concerns, we have the environment-related concerns, and we also have the reality that there's not a huge economic argument to be made for fracking, particularly with low oil prices. With oil prices where they are, why do you need shale gas fracking? Unless oil prices go way up, which would raise an impetus for an alternative, It's not even clear that there's a good economic case for fracking. This is something we should not be involved in.
Well, I guess these companies see it as cheaper and easier just to go with fracking instead of alternatives. And it's stubbornness. And, I would like to see it stop here. They're not going to pay any attention to these studies. Our politicians are not going to pay any attention to these studies because there's just too much money involved.
And some people will attack you and me and others, Lewis, who are against fracking and say, you're just against fracking regardless of the facts. To which I say, no, if fracking were safe, if fracking were not harmful to people, if fracking were not harmful to the environment, and it was a clear economic boon, why would I be against it?
Yeah, I would be all for it if it were safe, and I suppose if profits were good and it made sense and it boosted the economy. But it seems to be causing earthquakes. I think that's enough to say that it probably shouldn't be happening.
I have a clip I think you're really going to like. If you were wondering how could Fox and Friends on Fox News possibly get any worse, I have the answer. For some reason, co-anchor Pete Hegseth attempted to throw an axe at a target right before a commercial break. Several West Point drummers were lined up behind the target, drumming apparently to celebrate Flag Day. But instead of hitting the target, or even the wooden wall holding up the target, the axe sailed over the entire structure, Lewis, and hit one of the drummers and the drum that drummer was playing on, by some miracle, not dismembering him. This is drummer Jeff Prosperi, who posted about it on Facebook saying, quote, "I was hit by an axe while performing a drum solo live on national television, words I never imagined saying. This happened last Sunday and I've been reluctant to post, but I've started getting inquiries from concerned family and friends. I'm thankful to God that the double-sided blade only hit broadside on the outer elbow with significant impact and a couple of cuts as it fell along my wrist. Could have been much worse or fatal." Here's the video, here's the audio. A Fox News anchor almost killing a patriotic West Point drummer.
Who's going to win this battle of the lumberjacks? That's what's not that. I'm putting my money on Clayton.
Lewis, this was 12 inches away from hitting this guy in the head or the chest or anywhere, instead of hitting broadside on his arm and then the drum head. If this happened on another network, the headline on Fox News would be, "Television host attempts to murder brave U.S. military member trying to do his patriotic duty on Flag Day." Why does Fox and Friends hate the military and hate the flag?
I couldn't believe this video when I saw it. First of all, who set this thing up? Who
Right.
thought it was a good idea to throw this giant axe with this tiny little wall and have people standing behind it? Incredible. And how about, instead of thanking God that the axe didn't kill you, how about blaming Fox News and whoever set this thing up for putting you in harm's way?
Everything about this is, we could say, Lewis, completely off the mark.
I think so. I think that would be accurate. We can agree on that.
I just can't believe the idiocy of what is going on over there. Those axes can do serious damage. I mean, it's by sheer chance this individual was not seriously injured or killed.
I mean, if the blade hit him in the neck, I mean, the force behind that would have been devastating. It could have easily killed him. So I think just incredible. I mean, how does this happen?
I've said it before and I'll say it again, and I might be proven wrong, but this has to be the lowest that Fox and Friends can go, right? I guess only the future will tell.
Well, we thought the tire changing thing was pretty bad. now there's this. I don't think we've seen the bottom yet. I think that has yet to come.
After the break, we'll talk about flying cars.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
I'm joined today by Dr. Paul Moller, president of Moller International, and also someone who has been developing a modern flying car really for some time now, Dr. Moller. When did you first start this project?
Well, I was inspired when I was 5 after viewing a hummingbird, but I think the project probably was seriously started when I was about 15 and attempted to build my first helicopter.
And what is the status of the project currently?
Well, the project involves many arms because we have both unmanned technologies like the drone industry, which is very popular at the moment, and we have high-speed vehicles, vehicles that you would use as a commuter in the future. And then we have low-speed utility vehicles, much like the Jetson vehicle, that gets you from, as a utility vehicle, border patrol vehicle, rescue vehicle, one that speed is not important, but utility is. So I would say we have a number of different projects. And certainly one of the most important is that we're into engines of a unique nature. These engines really make everything else we do possible. These are what we call a rotor-power rotary engine. Power being the big issue, as it is with the hummingbird. When you think about it, the hummingbird apparently can consume its own weight in a single day. Taking off vertically does require a great deal of power, and that's really been the problem historically as to why you don't have a flying car in your garage at the moment.
Yeah, and there have been different people, including engineering experts and aeronautical experts, who have weighed in on your project, and they said, we don't know that this is really possible the way Dr. Paul Moller is approaching this. I'm sure you've heard those detractors. What's the current status? Is there a prototype? At what point in the process are you?
Well, we've demonstrated all of our technologies repeatedly. So we've done something that no one else has done. We've actually flown them. I've flown them personally. We've never felt comfortable enough to go out there and make an excessive public display. Certainly we've had press people present in some of our flights, but we're waiting for the ability to do an international press flight where we have a level of confidence in all the security methods that we've employed to make this safe. And we're working very hard at that at the moment. Multiple levels of redundancy on all components so that when we get in front of the public, there's not a catastrophe, because this technology is very unforgiving. When something goes wrong in an airplane, you usually have the capability of gliding to the ground. Certainly a fairly reasonable capacity to survive, but a vertical takeoff aircraft during the hover mode, like the helicopter below 200 feet when it's hovering, there is no recovery. So we do it through redundancy. We do it through multiple engines, multiple computers, multiple fuel tanks, multiple fuel pumps, everything that you can ask for. We have multiple elements. This is a complicated system in itself, but it ends up being a very reliable system. And
if people want to take a look at images of what we're discussing, just Google the Moller Skycar, Moller. Talk to us a little bit about, you mentioned that it uses a rotary engine. What would the top speed of this vehicle be when flying through the air?
Well, I'll always refer to two different vehicles, the Skycar being the more streamlined, high-speed, certainly more expensive vehicle, if one were to buy it, and then the lower speed vehicle, which we call the New Era. The Skycar has a top speed of roughly 300 miles an hour at 25,000 feet. Clearly, we have not flown there yet, but we've flown it in wind tunnels. We've flown it on computers. We know that we have the capacity to do that. And then the other vehicle, which never goes faster than 100 miles an hour, but is something that everybody can use, a rancher, a border patrol, any paramilitary application, any recreational application. These two vehicles fit two different roles, both, I think, which are going to be a big part of the future.
What's the highest that you've actually flown the prototype?
Well, high enough to kill myself. That much I can say, but probably not in excess of 100 feet. Anything above 10 feet becomes very dangerous. So again, probably I'm dealing in a very risky world, but I went after it many years ago, and I think it's a little late to change my path.
And why do you think that this has been such a long process? As you said, and as I've read, you've been on this path for about 50 years. We've been hearing about this sort of amorphous idea of flying cars for a long time. 100 years ago, people thought by the year 2000 we might have flying cars. Why has it been such a long path for you?
Well, it's a long path for anybody. And again, I emphasize the requirement for the power plant is very unique. You need to be able to produce at least 2 horsepower per pound. Right now, we're producing 3 horsepower per pound. We need 1,200 horsepower in a 2,400 pound vehicle. Try to think of that possibility. Now, if you go to very large rotors like a helicopter, you cheat, really. And of
Now,
course,
I don't mean to interrupt, Dr. Moller, but I want to make sure we're clear on the numbers. You said you need to produce 2 horsepower per pound, and then said you needed to produce 1,200 in a 2,400 pound vehicle. But don't you mean 4,800 in a 2,400 pound vehicle?
No, I mean 1,200 horsepower in a 2,400 pound vehicle. Our engines, in effect, weigh 600 pounds in a 25. They weigh about a third of the weight of the vehicle. Actually, we do better than that now that we've gone above that. But the bottom line is you don't have any engines that, other than our engine or perhaps a similar engine if someone chooses to develop it, that makes it possible to get these kind of power levels in a reliable package. The rotary engine, which is fundamentally what we're talking about, the same kind of engine in a way, at least from the family of the engines used in the Mazda, has the ability to produce a huge amount of power in a small package. It gets into the region of what the turbine can do, but the turbine engine is a very expensive engine. It'll always be an order of magnitude more expensive than the engines we're using. So economic standards into this. Certainly you see the military flying vertical takeoff aircraft all the time. You could call them flying cars if you like. I'm certain they could produce what's called a flying car, but they would also have an engine that costs $1 million. That's really the problem. How do you get this high amount of power in a lightweight package and not have it cost so much that it never would be available to the public in any reasonable way?
And what do you think that one of these flying cars would need to cost for it to be sort of economically viable as a transportation method for, not necessarily the average American, but even upper middle class?
Well, I think that it would have a very substantial market at $100,000, but I think it's possible, and I'm sure we can show that in economic production levels similar to that of a single model of the automobile industry, which in the case of the Mustang, for example, was 250,000 vehicles a year, we would certainly be in the area of 50,000. I don't think there's any issue about that because the only real cost to our vehicle is the engine. Our control system is so very simple because the engine does all the controls. So that's really the bottom line is the engines determine the cost. And right now we're in the engine business even more than we're in the aircraft business because we have conditional orders for $5 billion of engines. And if we can produce engines of high volume, economy of scale means the Skycar is going to be inexpensive. It's the driving force behind everything, safety and cost.
Yeah, and talk a little bit about safety. I mean, in reading about the sort of viability of the consumer flying car, it seems safety, cost, and the impact of weather. We're not talking about a commercial airliner with ILS and other navigation systems necessarily, are we? Weather would be a big factor.
Well, I think that you've got to consider that this vehicle will basically be flown automatically at all times in an environment where there's a lot of other vehicles. So you'll be in the highway in the sky with virtual highway. As you probably know, the airliners are landed more often than not by automatic landing today. In fact, the failures have typically been when it's manually controlled. The automatic landings by commercial airlines has been far more successful than the manual landings. So we're in a world where automation is far safer than the human in terms of the reliability. Consistency, perhaps, is a better way to put it. And so, yes, you'll get in this vehicle, you'll drive it. And when I say drive it, I mean it's streetable. You drive it to a vertiport or a heliport, as it's called today. You code in your destination and you go to sleep, you read, you play computer games, whatever you choose to do on the way. You can rearrange somewhere along the line to go to a different destination, but you certainly are not going to be at the controls. And there's no reason for you. It's far, far safer for it to be all programmed in the first place.
Last thing on this, as fascinating as this is, how far away do you think in terms of a timeline we are right now?
Well, it depends what level of vision you have as what you consider this becoming a commonplace vehicle. We have the opportunity to have this aircraft approved under new categories that didn't even exist a number of years ago, which make it easy to get to market. As you know, the drone industry is now allowed to fly up to 400 feet. And if you let people fly around without somebody on board at 400 feet, you certainly can let them fly around at 400 feet with somebody on board without a pilot's license and without FAA certification. So that's a big step. The next step beyond that's what's called light sports aviation category, a special subcategory for power lift, which our vehicle is, and that you can fly to 8,500 feet. And of course, the final category is FAA certified, where we can fly to 25,000. So you have various entry points, and that's very important. Getting access to this market in a way that makes anybody a candidate to use this vehicle is very, very important and critical to the success. So when I answer your question, next year we will have vehicles on the market. They will cost between $250,000 to $350,000 because they're basically hand built at this time. But Boeing has studied this vehicle, and many other aerospace companies have looked at it, and I think there's a consensus that in the volumes of 100,000, 200,000 vehicles, which is small relative to the auto industry, it'll be down around $50,000.
Truly fascinating. We've been speaking with Dr. Paul Moller. Moller International is the company, and you can Google the Moller Skycar. Thank you so much for being on with us.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
I was looking at some news headlines this morning, and I saw one saying that the internet hacktivist group known as Anonymous is targeting the Westboro Baptist Church for their threats to protest the funerals of the victims of the Charleston, South Carolina church shooting. And I thought, wait a second, that already happened on our show back in 2011, and it was international news when a member of Anonymous took down the Westboro Baptist Church website live during an interview on our show. And indeed, an article on the New York Daily News wrote that up. And the Google alerts, Lewis, were off the charts referencing the David Pakman Show as a result of this New York Daily News article this morning. Quote from the article, officials at Westboro didn't immediately respond to a request for a reaction to Anonymous's plans Monday night, but church member Shirley Phelps Roper confronted the group directly when she and a member of Anonymous appeared on the talk show, The David Pakman Show, during its first hack against the church in 2011. So Anonymous is again, Lewis, planning to target the Westboro Baptist Church in person and online if the church members picket the funerals of Charleston shooting victims this week, according to the hackers' announcement yesterday. If anyone is familiar with proof that Anonymous can do damage to the church, it would be us because it happened on our show.
It was quite memorable, and I'd love to see them face off again. I'm not sure what they're thinking of doing this time. I'd like to see them do more than just take down the website. Although, of course, if this is illegal activity, we can't condone it.
We as a rule, we do not condone any illegal activity or the breaking of any rules whatsoever.
Yes, but I am very curious to see what they have in store for the Westboro Baptist Church this time.
Masked and silent demonstrators plan to track Westboro Baptist Church members' locations and set up these nonviolent perimeters around any Westboro picketers. That's a pretty interesting idea. You have 4 Westboro picketers, and then you might have 6 or 8 members of Anonymous just encircle each of those picketers with their own signs, making the Westboro protesters completely invisible. I kind of like that idea.
Yes, I think that would be... Yeah, that would be great. It would kind of make their whole trip a waste, and it would keep their signs away from the cameras, and I guess that's all we can hope for.
This is an example of when I can actually understand why the Westboro Baptist Church would want to protest these funerals, because the admitted shooter, Dylann Roof, actually has some views that overlap with the views of the Westboro Baptist Church, certainly with regard to Jews.
Yeah, it seems that if things worked out better, perhaps they could have been great friends. But I think he'll probably just be locked away for quite some time.
Let's talk about the Indiegogo crowdfunding campaign. We are trying to raise $50,000 in 50 days, and we are just hanging on to staying on schedule with the fundraising. Yesterday was day 23 of fundraising, meaning the goal was $23,000 by midnight last night, and we did it. $23,253 the total, with 354 donors. I have to say, Lewis, if the campaign ended today, it's already been the biggest campaign we've ever done. And it's just so inspiring that over 350 people have donated so far from close to 25 countries.
And I still think we will probably break 30 countries. It's incredible. I can't believe that people want to listen to me and look at your hair. It's fascinating.
It's stunning and grotesque, and just it shows how important independent media is, that people are willing to brave my hair, which is not a wig, I will remind you, in order to support independent media. A lot of people might just be listening, though, so they don't have to deal with it. And fortunately, my hair is not causing any audio disturbances, so the podcast and radio show version are unaffected. So today is day 24. By the end of the day, midnight tonight, that means we need to be at $24,000. We're $747 away. I think we can do this, Lewis. $747. If we get $250 and a couple hundreds, and then a bunch of 10s and 25s, we're there.
That sounds good. Let's reach for the stars here, and we need people's help. Let's make this happen.
The most popular perks so far. 42 people have selected bumper stickers, which I have here. Let me hold them up. Here is the white bumper sticker, and here is the black bumper sticker. These don't have to go on your car. They can go on your laptop. They can be on your bicycle. You could put them on someone else's car, presuming that it doesn't violate any laws in your state or country, of course. Second most popular perk is the David Pakman Show t-shirt made from 100% recycled materials. 39 people have opted for the t-shirt, followed by the hoodie. 24 people opting for the hoodie, available in both pullover and zip-up style. 10 people have selected the thank you postcard, where I will write a custom thank you postcard to you and send it off to you. And then 7 people have gone with the Hatriot Mail movie posters, which I have here, actually. These are small versions of the posters. Here is one, which has an actual quote from one of the Hatriot Mail introductions. This is the one Lewis likes. Lewis really likes the cartoon baby typing up Hatriot Mail on a laptop. And then the second Hatriot Mail poster, a 1970s style movie poster, reminiscent of like a Burt Reynolds film or something. I don't know, Lewis. Very, very cool. Both posters available as premiums through our campaign. What is the most important detail? Things are falling. Most important detail I have not told you so far. It's how to donate. Go to davidpakman.com/donate. $747 is the goal by midnight tonight. Anything else you want to add, Lewis?
I think that is. I think you've summarized it nicely. Let's keep the ball rolling.
davidpakman.com/donate. $24,000. I would love it, Lewis, if tomorrow I was able to announce that we reached that goal by midnight tonight. We have a voicemail number. It's 219-2-DAVID-P. Questions, criticisms, concerns, complaints about the fundraiser and how much we talk about it for the next couple weeks. All welcome at 219-2-DAVID-P. Here is one voicemail for today.
Hi, Dave and Lewis. I was wondering if given the chance, would Lewis lead a military coup in North Korea, thus freeing the people of North Korea? And if given the chance, would he rule North Korea as its own state or reintegrate it with the whole Korea and just make it one Korea? Anyway, thanks.
All right. Kind of an audience question, Lewis. You saying that there really should be a coup in North Korea. First of all, part A of the question, would you lead such a coup?
Oh, well, I don't know if I should be the person to lead the military coup. I don't think it's a good idea. But I will say this. If there is a coup, if there is a takeover, if things change there, and humanitarian groups are allowed into the country, I would love to be one of the people on the ground helping to rebuild that country. I think that would be an incredible experience.
All right, let's say you did lead the coup. You accidentally lead the coup and it's successful, right? To kind of paraphrase it hypothetically. Would you rule North Korea as an independent state, or would you push for reunification with South Korea?
I would push for reunification. I would like to see one Korea, David. That is my dream.
Wow. That is, I think a lot of our audience is going to be taken aback by that. We'll maybe elaborate on that in the bonus show today, where Lewis will tell us about a ton of ivory crushed in Times Square, Samsung working to improve road safety, some super interesting road safety prototype technology that we will talk about, and a smog emergency in Santiago, Chile. We will talk about all of those stories and Lewis's potential rule of North Korea on the bonus show, davidpakman.com/membership, and of course the fundraising campaign at davidpakman.com/donate.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.